we did enough sound checks. It should work.
Okay. Awesome. Sounds good. We're on a roll. It's great. I think that this time of night is when I can't really make any coherent thought, but sometimes I think it is okay.
Yeah, I think you're fine. It's for the most part that was coherent for both of us. I thought, anyways. I'm sure
Well,
when you listen back to this, you're gonna be like, none of that made any sense. This was a terrible intro episode. Don't ever do that again.
actually, I think that most people don't like listening to podcasts that are really well rehearsed anyway. Like they want you human beings talking to each other about stuff they're interested in.
Yeah, I
So
agree. Okay, hello, look, welcome back to Living Had My Arm with your hosts, Gretchen Crowder and JP Mancini. We're going to talk a little bit today about our experiences together in Indonesia, in Yogyakarta. So we're interviewing each other in this episode. And basically, I was going to say 2 weeks. I don't know if it was quite 2 weeks. Of those 2 weeks, 6 days may have just been traveling to Indonesia. But our time together at JESEDU-Jogja in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And I think, obviously, that as we mentioned in our intro episode, that was the birth of this podcast. And it's important, I think, for people to understand what that was and what it meant, not just to the both of us, but to the global Jesuit network. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
So I was very aware of the Jesuit Schools Network and have been attending Jesuit Schools Network things in North America for my entire career in Jesuit schools. But this was a new experience for me to be a part of the 9-year cycle of global gatherings of educators. And I think, if I'm correct, this is the second 9-year cycle, right?
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
one is focusing specifically on educating for faith in the 21st century. I know that we'll talk a little bit about what we thought about going into it and how we processed going through it and after it. But the real purposes and the aims of the seminars that were introduced to us before and at the start of our week together was clarifying the meaning of being Catholic Jesuit schools at the service of the gospel and the church in the context of today's time, promoting in-depth faith formation in the context of interreligious and multi-convictional dialogue in the service of our mission of justice and reconciliation, clarifying the place of Ignatian spirituality in the faith formation process for students and educators, and identifying the challenges and opportunities of educating for faith within secular, religious, fundamentalistic contexts.
I'm glad you had to talk about those, because I think if I had to try to read that off, I would have had a big struggle there.
Fundamentalistic.
Yeah, you got they're very wordy, a lot of that stuff. But I think we can break it down after as to what some of those things were. Before we even talk about it, though, and because I'm curious, I was thinking about this before we did the podcast, because you mentioned obviously this is the first time for you being part of the 9-year cycle, first time for me being involved in the 9-year cycle. I wasn't fully aware of how these things worked prior to us speaking about it with the rest of the group. What was your reaction to it at first when you found out about this? And then, when we got that initial email, I think we all got one of those initial emails from
Congratulations.
yeah, that really long email where you weren't exactly sure what it was, but what was your reaction?
I remember I got the email randomly on a Saturday. Like, my house was super noisy and I was reading through it and I saw congratulations. I was like, for what? What did I apply for? And then I was really excited as I read through like what we were going to talk about, what the purpose was. It's everything I like talking about. It's everything that I like doing. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is amazing. And then I got to the part where it says, we will be traveling to Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And I was like, I haven't
Immediately
left
went
the
to find a
continent.
map. Did you go find a map?
I just first thought I've been to Canada and I've been to Mexico, but I have not left the continent. So anywhere off the continent for me was going to be a leap. But that was, I had to go to the map and be like, okay, where is that? And then immediately I Googled, how long does it take to fly there? And I was like, oh, deep breath. I
Yeah,
love
I
this.
know.
I'm going to say yes. I'm going to have to take some deep breaths
Yeah,
about how far it is.
gonna need some deep breaths and obviously some anti-anxiety medication, which all of us had to use to get there. For me, I don't remember exactly why, but I remember when we got the email, like you said, on that Saturday night or whatever it was. It's impressive that you could remember it was a Saturday. Pretty good. I can't remember that, but it must have been some type of like week where one of those really tough weeks because I remember calling my parents to tell them, hey, this just happened. I could almost not get through some of it. I was pretty emotional about it in the sense that I think I know you feel this way too. You're dedicated to something, and to feel that you've been asked to participate in
Mhm.
something like this, where they could have taken so many people.
Right.
There's so many incredible educators, people that we work with in different capacities, and you're like, why would they take me instead of instead of this person that is clearly so much more intelligent and qualified than I am to be doing
Yeah.
this? So there was a lot of that for me, just this incredible feeling of gratitude towards the network and to whoever made that possible. But yes, obviously the second aspect of that, and people don't know me, but my horrific fear of flying was the next thing that came into my mind. And how am I going to take 3 airplanes to the literal other end of the world and do that twice in less than 14 days? So that was that. Those were the two major reactions or emotions. One of incredible gratitude, one of horrendous fear that this might be the last trip I ever take again.
I was just glad that when we first got on a call together of all the delegates from North America, that you were the first one to say you were afraid of the flight because I was thinking it, but I was glad somebody else said it. However, you did not have to go the route that was straight over the ocean for 16 hours. You took a very different path than the rest of us that went straight over the ocean. So
I think there
I
was a
don't know
lot of
which one was more fearful.
yeah. I think there was didn't I didn't really care whether there was water underneath me or land underneath me. There was nothing about it that felt comfortable or safe. Not at any point on that initial 14-hour flight was I feeling like things were going great.
But look, we're here. We went there and we came back, and now any flight less than that amount of time, we're in. We can do it.
And with anti-anxiety medication, anything is possible.
And with Father Josh Peters sitting a seat away from you so that when the turbulence got really bad on the way back and he put his hand on my shoulder, I just was like, "Oh, thank you." That was
That was
helpful.
the other side of it is you guys, for the most part, flew with a group, right? Like the heavy flying for all of you was as a group. I was basically on my own for that first little while. Not even just the first flight. So that first flight for me was Montreal, Japan for 14 hours.
Mhm.
Then from Japan to Singapore for another 9 hours. And then I was in Singapore alone for almost 24 hours before I was able to connect with any of the other members of the group. So I really, for a long time, felt completely isolated on the way there in a part of the world where you can't speak the languages. Um, but for me, I think it was actually a great part of the experience, just learning to be alone and feeling like it's going to be fine. I've now just done 2 days completely by myself, and it was great, honestly.
And And that really felt like it was part of the point and something that was really important. I felt it going in and I felt it coming back. That so often we ask people to come to North America, to come either to the United States or Canada, to be in our world and have conversations in the places that we are familiar with, right? And to be able to go to a place that is completely different from our experience and be able to enter into a place with a language that we don't speak, to be able to have to figure out how to navigate a place we've never been before, and also to really get to know a people and their culture firsthand in person. I think that I know that was a part of the planning of this location, but also that's something I really got out of it as well. I think that was just so key to understanding who we are as a global community.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't think about this as much until we were actually in Indonesia. But because you spent a lot of time talking about the spirit of the early Jesuits. And when I look back on that and think about what was, I want to say pilgrimage, but maybe that's not the right word when you spend most of your time on an airplane. But that feeling of traveling to a completely foreign place and trying to do work uh, that you feel is good and being done for the greater glory of God, that that feeling is a little bit alive in you when you're making that trip. Don't compare, obviously, our flights to Indonesia to people traveling from Europe to the New World. I don't know if that's quite fair in terms of the comfort level, but at least in our context, in our individual context, there was a little bit of that, a feeling of, wow, we've come all this way to talk about the things that we do in our work, but because they're things we think are critical to the bettering the world that we live in right now, especially to help young people find those values and live them out. So I thought there was some of that for sure.
Yeah, and there's definitely no comparison to Saint Ignatius, who had to write a letter that might have taken weeks or months to get to
Yeah,
his men, and those of us that were WhatsApping, between our
yeah,
flights across the
the
and
what
then being
happened.
very mad when the Wi-Fi wasn't working because we really wanted to tell people how many hours we had left on the plane. So so we survived the flight experience. How was it when we first came together for you of 12 of us from North America, uh, 13 of us from North America, 12 of us from the United States, one from Canada, but
Yeah.
being able to come together first just as our community, because we had a whole maybe 24 hours of just being with one another. There were other people trickling in, but we hadn't gotten together with the whole seminar yet.
Honestly, I think, and again, I can only speak for myself, but that first 24 hours that we had prior to the seminar starting, I actually think was critical to the seminar being successful for us individually. Um, we didn't spend any time together in person prior to that. At least I hadn't. I know you knew a few people that were with us, right? You may have met a few of them before. Did you, or you
Yeah.
had never met anyone?
I met a couple people when the mission formation officer gathering
Oh
in
yeah,
Puerto
exactly.
Rico,
Yeah.
a few of them, but for the most part, I think a lot of us were pretty new to one another.
Yeah, but so to me, the 24 hours, despite the really bad sunburn that I got in that initial 24 hours when I forgot what it meant to be on the equator, where Alex and I were essentially burnt to a crisp. That was great. But to be honest, that being burnt to a crisp was simply just a small sacrifice to make because we spent so much time talking about our work that was really just conversational and talking to somebody else who understood, who felt like understood some of the challenges that we were working through. And then same thing with you and with Marcus, and I knew Damien a little bit and got to spend time with them. So these are all people obviously that were with us, but getting to speak to these people for 24 hours was critical to the success. It was just about sharing some of the feelings of the challenges and the gratitude that we had for the jobs that we do. That was really important for me. And again, we did do some we did a lot of prep work
Mhm.
prior to getting there, right? We had all kinds of online sessions to talk about what to expect and what it would be like. But I think every time we left one of those Zoom calls, none of us were really sure what we were going to be walking into. It seemed like at the end of every time we met, we'd be like, "So what exactly are we doing?" And the answer would be like, "Look, here's what's going to happen, but ultimately we're not really sure. We're just going to see when we get there."
Yeah.
That's what it was like.
Mhm.
So that was those 24 hours was really about the connections that were made, and that made it that made the week for me. The connections.
Yeah, for sure. And also, it was an opportunity to just have some humor and some kind of soft introduction to each other and then to where we were, to get lost, to try to find things that were familiar to us. I did find a Starbucks on the first day, which may be shameful, but also I think is pretty cool because it made me feel like I was finding a piece of home somewhere in the community. But being able to have that kind of exploratory 24-hour period where we were figuring out A, to wear sunscreen,
Hmm.
and then also how to get to, the store across the street for water, things like that really helped us then be fully attentive to the program. I also think it's so interesting that even though the first 24 hours were really just about those of us in the JSN getting to know each other better, we went some of us that got there at a certain time went to mass at the retreat center where the Jesuits were staying.
Yeah.
And that was cool too, to be able to softly introduce ourselves to some of the other people that were already there. But I remember that that was my first introduction to being in a predominantly Muslim country, because as communion was happening, as the liturgy of the Eucharist was happening, the call to prayer was happening throughout the country, and it reverberated everywhere. I mean, you couldn't help but hear it, and it was just so profound for me in that moment to see that the country was praying, and then we were praying, and they were happening at the same time, right? And they were both directed towards God. It was a really cool introduction that kept coming up throughout the whole week because those things kept coinciding. And I remember someone asking, like, in Dallas, do you have Muslim communities? Do you have mosques? I said, yes, we do. But since it's not the whole country and there's not as many open air areas as where we were, I've
Yeah.
never heard the call to prayer. Right. And so to be able
Never.
to hear that, I
Yeah.
think even as you were being burnt by the sun, you could hear it at the pool.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was really cool to just be really immersed in that.
I appreciate that you threw us under the bus by saying those of us were at the pool while you guys were at mass, because that's not actually,
Not at
well,
the
it is.
same time.
To
No,
be
that
fair,
wasn't accurate. Not at the
no, to
same
be
time.
fair, that no, it is true. It is true. But the thing is, we had actually gone across the street to DeBrito College to
Mm,
do mass in their small chapel there,
that's
and
right. That's right.
that was an incredible experience because the small chapel is basically in the center of what looks like, your traditional Zen garden. So
Mhm,
you don't think of a Jesuit community um, in a Zen garden. Those two things don't quite go together, and so we were able to do that. And what was beautiful about that initial mass there that we had, there was 5 or 6 of us, was that the mass was done by one of our
mhm,
companions that we were traveling with, and to get that first experience with that person, being them celebrating mass and then living with them for 6 or 7 days, I thought that was great too. And yeah, just the idea of mass, what that looked like in a different country, and
mhm,
not just a different country, a very different culture and very different reality. And like you said, happening in a country that's 80% or predominantly Muslim, I mean, more than that. I don't
mhm,
remember the exact percentage, but you know, significantly Muslim population uh, was an incredible experience. I don't think we were used to being the minority or feeling like any
mhm,
type of minority uh, in our own countries.
mhm. Especially not, or particularly not a religious minority, right? To be
Yeah,
able to,
exactly. A religious minority,
yeah,
for
to
sure.
see that. And then also just to see that those things, those ways of prayer coinciding so beautifully together. That was really meaningful for me, I know, in the beginning of the experience.
Yeah. What about uh, the meeting of people? Maybe not within our own group. What did you feel like that was like the initial stages of meeting people from different countries and different Jesuit institutions? How did you feel that was?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience because, you first go in and you recognize that, I recognize this one. I think it was day 1, at the very end of the day, the person that had been leading us through, the speaker and other things, asked us all to pray the Our Father in our native language.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
that was the first time that it wasn't just Spanish or English, because the conference was in Spanish or English, but it was so many different languages that at first it was like just discordant, right? All these different languages going on, and then they kind of all flowed together, and it was another powerful moment of saying we're all together from all these different countries and these different cultures, but we also speak just a wide variety of languages. It
yeah,
also reminded me that there are so many languages, yet everyone was speaking English for the most part, and then Spanish as well, but really English for the most part. And I thought, what would it look like if I was forced to, throughout this seminar, speak French, for example, that I don't know how to speak, but I know that you do. So, meeting people, I know that I flocked towards people who are English speakers first, out of the ability to have that instant relationship and be able to understand one another's conversation. But
Yeah.
as the week progressed, I found that I had some really profound encounters with non-English speakers as well, especially Spanish speakers from Mexico and from Spain, because it is so close to my context, and to be able to kind of then try to have a conversation in Spanish with them, and see where our commonalities are between Texas and Mexico, or between Texas and Venezuela. So it was a great experience. It took some time, right,
Yeah.
to get to know people and to enter into more and more comfort level with the different people that you were encountering.
I felt the same way. I found that the first couple of days, it was a really really big challenge to connect with the people that weren't from the North American group. I don't think it was just us, although we were
Mhm.
certainly not part of the solution in the first couple of days, where you felt you'd met this few people from your continent or your country, and we kind of stuck together because it was comfortable and safe. But then over the course of the first, I would say by day three, essentially, it felt very comfortable speaking to people from various contexts around the world. Whereas in day one and two, I know that there was an attempt to kind of like force us together at times, and you could really feel that it was forced. People were not comfortable. It didn't feel like people were ready to have some of those conversations yet, and I think that was normal. Maybe we needed to go through some of that discomfort for a day or two to get to that point. But no, it was really interesting to see how that transition happened by day three, where really, as you said, you were starting to connect with people. You talked about your connection to some of the Latin American countries.
Mhm.
For me, it was, which I would never have expected in terms of culture. The group that I tended to flock towards at the end was some of the group from India.
Mhm.
We had them in our smaller group for discussions, and there were some similarities in terms of what the education system was like between Montreal, Quebec, and India. And I think at one point there was a connection that was developed there, and that became very comfortable for me to connect with them and to share ideas and challenges with them. Which again, one of the beauties of that was just that I never would have expected that. I
Mhm.
never would have expected there to be some really strong ties and connections between Quebec and India.
Yeah, I was looking through my phone the other day trying to tell someone about the experience, and there were so many pictures of me with another Jesuit, because I had taken a selfie with a Jesuit to send to a Jesuit I knew in the United States and say, "I met your friend over here in Indonesia from India or from Venezuela or whatever," because the Jesuits themselves, much like Jesuits throughout all of history, are so interconnected that they had these connections between countries and between continents that made the world seem a little smaller to me as well. Like if I was talking to someone that I just met from a country I've never visited, but they knew somebody that I worked with last year, that was so interesting for me, right? That point of connection. And it was mainly from the Jesuits that were with us, right? Because they travel a whole lot more and interact a whole lot more globally than many of us have so far, at least.
Yeah, I agree. What about so what now? We talked about obviously the podcast, but what has happened for you since you got back home from this trip? And I know it was a little while ago now. We're talking, obviously the beginning of July when we got back, but we're now 2 months away from that. And what's going on for you? Like, does it affected your work? Has it affected your home life? I'm curious.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I was thinking about how much like, and both of us have led student retreats, right? So much like students who go on a Kairos retreat, they have that Kairos moment, that right time, and they are alive with the spirit and ready to go. And then they go home, and then a week happens, and 2 week happens. And so the curiosity is always, will that spirit keep kind of percolating within you and getting you excited for your work? I will say that that has been true for me. I have definitely still been on fire for the mission and for what we spoke about, and really passionate about sharing these ideas with others. There can also be this, like, okay, let's get going. Let's solve all the world's problems now. Let's make sure that we like do all of these things that we set out to do. And in a seminar program like this, or like anything we do in the church, right? We've established a vision statement, and we can do things in our individual entities, but it's going to take time to figure
And
out how this looks, right?
that's that's great because we talked about that at the end too, right? Was trusting in the slow work of God at
Mhm.
times, that it doesn't need to be done immediately. So being able to be patient
Mhm.
and believe and have faith in the fact that this is going to take time. Again, we have to also keep in mind that's part of the process too. Is this was one of the initial steps in the process of looking at how Jesuit schools can alter the way they do things to continue to be successful for another couple hundred years, hopefully at least,
Mhm.
and that requires patience. There were no solutions that I think came out of that were clear cut for every context and every school and every person. So that idea of being trusting in that slow work is, I think, was great, and I was kind of surprised by that. That wasn't an expectation that I
Mhm.
had for us when we left there. I really did think we'd go back and it'd be like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And I haven't felt that. In fact, it's been the opposite. Like, okay, let's start to talk about this
Mhm.
and then see where it takes us, and having some faith that that's going to work.
Yeah, but in the same way, I think I keep coming back to another thread that we had throughout that week, which is not to be afraid of promoting the mission, figuring out ways to continue the mission, figuring out ways to form people in the mission in Ignatian spirituality.
Mm.
Because I think sometimes we can be afraid of all the other factors that exist that we need to be concerned about to keep our schools alive, right? And
Yeah.
functioning in the 21st century. And so being able to say, and I think one of our major threads was remembering Christ, speaking about Christ, being unapologetically Christian while dialoguing with other faiths and other religions, but really being steadfast in who we are.
Mm.
I think that the Jesuits throughout history have had to battle with being in contexts where it was difficult to continue the mission, but also being steadfast in the goal, which was this faith, this um, being Christ's hands and feet in the world, bringing the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven. So it's a patience and a let's not be so patient or afraid that we
Yeah.
don't make progress forward.
Yeah. I agree. And one of the things that was new, I mean, it was not it had nothing to do with the actual seminar. But when we came back, and this just happened a couple of weeks ago, is for the first time at school. I think I mentioned this to you already, that we were leading a retreat for our outside coaches at our school. So
Mhm.
basically, parents and volunteers and alumni, um, but a collection of people from different backgrounds and different professions and things like that. And the goal of the retreat was to show them what it is that it is, the philosophy of a Jesuit school, and how do you incorporate that into your philosophy as an athletics department. Which at first I was like, I'm not sure how many people are gonna buy into this. These guys are not here to get a lesson on religion, but I was blown away by how engaged they were in the conversations and how interested they were in not just taking what they do and focusing on the specific sport that they had, but really consciously understanding what is it that Ignatius is calling us to do in this aspect of their life in coaching. How can I share that with the students from 12 to 17 years old, at least in our case. And I was inspired. I was It was inspiring. It was nice to see people being willing to hear that and to hear them speaking the same language and using the vocabulary that we had talked about. while we were away. And I think as you said, we need to be more courageous about that. Where are we reaching out? Where are we looking at places in our own institutions where maybe we're not doing a good enough job of of discussing the Christian values that we're supposed to live out? And to see people hear that, be engaged in it, and come away from that feeling positive about the conversation, that's really what we want to do with all of these things that we've discussed.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I know that I was drawn into learning about the mission and about Ignatian spirituality because of what I witnessed in the colleagues around me when I first started working at a Jesuit school. I couldn't put my finger exactly on what it was. It was something intangible within them, but it was something that was different from any other place that I had been. And I wanted to know what that was. What was that thing inside of them, that spirit moving inside of them, and how could I kind of harness that in myself as well? And so, yeah, we've all of us that were at that conference, you and I here on this call, like we have been transformed by this, and we want to be able to share that with others because we know how powerful it can be, and having that faith that they'll see that in us and that they'll see that in others who have been transformed by Ignatian spirituality and want to just delve deeper, to have that trust that the presence of it, the embodiment of the mission is enough.
And that's really the goal of Ignatian spirituality, I think, right? To create that transformation. Obviously a transformation towards God, but that can be a long process that's not going to happen overnight. But ultimately it begins with a transformation and with beginning a relationship with God. And I think that that's what we all came away being transformed. I think obviously those of us who were there felt a connection to our faith and felt a personal relationship with God already, but still we were transformed in that relationship, a deepening of that relationship through the seminar.
And we could have never done that on a Zoom call with 100 people. Like what happened was because we all traveled from various places to
Yeah.
be in the same location together for a week. So I think it's a both and. I love that we're doing this podcast and that we have other resources available and videos and things to make the world a little bit smaller.
Yeah,
But the more that we can also be in person with one another is it's really a big important part of the work as well.
definitely. Now we were trying to come up with a last question to ask our guests. You had
Mhm.
one, I had one. So let's do it this way. I'll ask you, let's do them both,
Okay.
but let's just answer quickly, like, less than 30 seconds to answer each question. All right. So if you
Okay.
could travel back in time to 1540 and ask Ignatius one question, what would it be? Go ahead. 30 seconds.
One of my closest colleagues right now hurt his knee, and I made this meme of him getting a cannonball hitting his knee. And so I just want to ask Ignatius, dude, how's the leg? I'm just curious. Does it still hurt this many years later?
That's the one thing our students remember about anything about
We didn't
Ignatius. It's
say
like,
it a
oh,
whole
do you remember
lot.
when he had his knee blown off? That was like the only thing they remember. Last year I was teaching a grade 7 religion class, and that was it. They only cared about that. I remember when his leg got blown off by the cannonball. You're like, okay, well, that wasn't quite it, but close enough.
I'm sure I have more profound questions, but 30 seconds, that's what I came up with.
I
So
get it. No, I get
you
it.
have 30 seconds to answer one that's a little harder. At what point did you feel your call towards working in a Jesuit education was so clear that you could no longer deny it?
Well, for the simplest way of putting this is it was when I started working. Actually, I wouldn't even say it goes to when I started working. It was when I was in school at a Jesuit high school, and there was a moment I was at a retreat in grade 11, which is a graduating year in Quebec, different than other parts of the world. But there was a moment there where it was so obvious to me that that's where I wanted to be, and I saw transformation both in myself but in my classmates. And at that point, it was like, yep, this is what I want. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and continue to share that with young people and hope that they can experience the same thing that I had experienced.
What's interesting is that often, that's the tale from alumni of our Jesuit schools. Like, when I was in the school, I was transformed by the people that were my faculty and staff that led me. I've been in a Jesuit school for 18 years, and I am just now currently enrolled in a Jesuit institution. So for some of us, the being enrolled in a Jesuit institution comes way later, but
Yeah,
there
true.
is many different ways that we all get alive on this with the spirit and want to be in the work.
And I think what those places do so well, what Jesuit institutions do better, I'm going to say do better because I'm confident I have no problem promoting the mission, is that they allow people to be themselves and to be who they are and to be
Hmm.
proud of who they are, and they help them find these gifts that they already had in them. God's already given them these gifts, but the people in those institutions uh, have been given this incredible ability to bring it out of young people. And I think that's why so many young people that are involved in Jesuit schools feel the call to return in adulthood, because it maybe one makes them feel stay young, but also that they're capable of being who they are and who God made them, and that they can use that in a very productive, fulfilling way.
Yeah. It's about that authenticity that
Mm.
really draws people in for sure. So, JP, as we wrap up our episode, we really want to wrap up these episodes with talking about what's the point of gratitude that we have right now in the last week or so, and the graces that we desire. Both of us are just now entering into a busy new school year. What for you right now is a point of gratitude and a grace desired for the upcoming week?
So, in terms of gratitude, there's many. We just got through our first week of school, just ended a couple of hours ago, and gratitude for my colleagues, gratitude for the families that continue to entrust their kids to us. That to me is such an incredible thing, and I often talk about that to parents in the first week. Is please don't think that uh, we're not cognizant of what that meant to you to entrust your children to us. Like, and both of us have small kids or have young kids, and you understand how important they are to you. So when someone hands over their child to you and is like, please help us raise them as best as you can, that's a pretty important thing that they've done. So for me, there's a gratitude there that I have for that. I feel this deep sense of gratitude to families in our community that continue to entrust us with their children. And in terms of a grace desired, and the big thing for us is, while it was a great first week at school, it was also a very challenging first week at school. And in many ways, we experienced losses and some suffering and health issues in our community over the last couple of days. And for me, the grace that's desired is just strength for the families and for the people in our community that are dealing with these incredible struggles. And then the other grace is some wisdom, having God help us understand why some of these things have happened, and how can we take take the positives from these very difficult situations and move forward to help people um, deal with the struggles, but also better understand um, why these tragedies do happen, and why we can continue to move forward in life. That's a grace that I'm seeking for the upcoming weeks. How about you? What about areas of gratitude?
Yeah, as I was listening to you talk, I was like, okay, ditto, ditto, ditto. Like, oh, he's saying exactly what I would say on some of these things, because it's interesting from, Montreal, Canada to Dallas, Texas. We experience a lot of the same things going on in our schools, right? Both joys and sorrows at the same time. I would say some of the points of gratitude I have right now is one, this, I don't know if this summer changed everyone as much as I feel like it changed me. And I don't think I felt it when we were there as much as I do now entering into the school year, that there's just something uh, profound that's changed in me, that I am able to kind of look at my colleagues in a new way, look at my students in a new way, and see God in them, but also see just those beautiful elements of them that are unique, and how they add to the community and to one another. And I'm also really grateful. I started this practice every morning going into work to go through gratitudes of the day before, but also advanced gratitude for the day. Like, thank you, God, for giving me blah, blah, blah when I needed it today, even though today hasn't happened yet. And so I'm also grateful that God's playing that little game with me, but also giving me those graces throughout the day that I need, and really helping me through that process. And I think the grace I desire right now is just to be able to continue to encounter and be present to my colleagues and to my students in a new way, to really recognize not only who they are at school, but also this whole world that they have outside of our school, too, and how that affects them when they show up. And also the grace to be present to my family, because I know that we all are very on fire for the mission and on fire for the work that we do. And it can be exhausting, right? When you come home and you also want to be on fire for your family and present to your family. And so the grace I desire is that not only for me, all of us have the ability to be present at home as well as at work.
Yeah, I'll take that one too. Am I allowed to also request some of that grace at the same time?
Of course. Of course.
Okay, good. I'll take that.
Just don't take any of mine. You can have some additional grace, but
Yes,
I need it first.
there's plenty to go around, plenty of graces to go around for all of us. I'm glad we actually got through this. I think there were times in the last month we kept talking about this, and finding the time to do it seemed like it was going to be impossible. So the fact that we were able to actually sit down after our first week of school, and I'm sure there's exhaustion starting to kick in.
Yeah.
This was great.
And that you weren't terrified when I sent you a WhatsApp message and said, I've just secured the podcast name for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're in whether you
without speaking to me. Yeah, without ever really speaking to me about it. Like, great.
No, we're doing it.
Yeah, good job. All right.
Thank you for joining us today for our conversation. If you like this podcast and would like to hear more or help others find it, please subscribe and leave a review. To follow along and contribute to the conversation, as well as engage with the other resources offered, follow Living Ad Maiorem on Instagram and bookmark the website livingadmaiorem.org. Both links are in the show notes. This podcast and associated website are an offering of the Jesuit Schools Network and are supported by passionate educators throughout North America. So until next time, remember that your work living towards the greater matters. After all, it is how others see God alive in you.